Cole, that kayak's been in the driveway too long again. You're blocking the fire lane. Deborah's voice cut sharp through the warm morning air as she stood on the sidewalk, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning every inch of my property like it was a crime scene. You need to move it or face a fine. I didn't flinch. That kayak's been there for years, and it's my property. You want to cite me? Bring it on. I knew Deborah was just the HOA's front, but this was personal. She narrowed her eyes, but before she could speak, I added, that motion sensor on your gate? Still connected to my server. I wrote the firmware controlling your whole security system. She blinked, momentarily thrown. I leaned in, voice low but steady. Name's Cole Hartman. Engineer, former military intel analyst, and heir to this house. My family's legacy. You can't intimidate me with petty rules. I stepped back, letting the silence stretch just long enough for her to rethink her next move. Look, I'm not here to lecture you about HOA drama. I want to know where you're watching from right now and if you've ever felt like the little guy standing up to a mountain of bureaucracy. This story, it's about family, legacy, and fighting back when the rules get twisted. My family home sits right on Linden Street, in a neighborhood where everyone knows everyone, and every inch of the yard holds a memory. Like the old oak tree my dad planted before he passed. Its gnarled roots are tangled with my childhood. That tree, to me, is more than just a tree. It's a symbol of endurance. It's why I refuse to back down. You see, after my dad died, this house wasn't just a roof over my head anymore. It was the last piece of him left in this world. That kayak? My dad built it himself. We used to spend hours on Lake Sycamore. Quiet mornings, just the two of us, drifting on the water while the world woke up. When the HOA started complaining, it wasn't about a kayak in the driveway. It was about erasing those memories. So yeah, when Deborah told me to move it, I felt something deeper than annoyance. I felt a fight stirring, and I knew this was just the beginning. But here's the kicker. This isn't some small-time HOA squabble where you pay a fine and move on. These people want control over every inch of my family's life, and I'm done playing their game. The irony? The HOA president, Marlene Beckett, claims she's preserving community standards, but all I see is a power grab wrapped in rule books. And if you think this is just about a kayak, wait until you hear what happened next. The rules started piling up. Parking tickets, fines, threats. It felt like they were trying to squeeze us out piece by piece. That's when I called Riley, my old friend, ex-Delta Force, someone who knows how to handle more than just paperwork and petty squabbles. I won't lie, the tension in this neighborhood is thick. Every smile hides a calculation, every friendly nod masks suspicion, but I'm standing firm, because this house isn't just mine, it's my family's legacy, and I'll fight tooth and nail to protect it. Now, I want to ask you, have you ever faced a fight that felt bigger than just rules? A fight that was about dignity, about history, about standing your ground? Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. And if you want to hear how this little war with the HOA escalated from a kayak dispute to something that shook the whole neighborhood, stick around, because this story is just getting started. The morning after that confrontation with Deborah, the mailbox was stuffed with more than just junk. Another fine notice from the HOA landed in our hands, this time for unauthorized exterior decorations. I stared down at the yellow slip, the official-looking stamps mocking me. The kayak, my dad's pride and joy, was suddenly a violation. The very symbol of my family's history had become a target. Marlene Beckett, the HOA president, was a constant shadow now. Every email, every letter carried the same cold undertone, control. When I called her office to challenge the fines, the woman who answered wasn't interested in conversation. Community standards must be maintained, she said, her voice clipped, robotic. Your property rights do not exempt you from the rules. I sighed, remembering my dad's old oak tree outside the kitchen window. It had weathered storms, droughts, and years of neglect, standing tall as the neighborhood changed around it. That tree was like my family, rooted deep, unyielding, and I wasn't about to let a clipboard-wielding tyrant chop that down. Later that week, I decided to attend the HOA's monthly meeting. Walking into the community hall, I felt the eyes, some curious, others wary. Marlene sat at the head of the room, her posture rigid, lips pressed tight. She greeted me with a thin smile, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Hartman," she said, voice dripping with false sweetness. "We're here to discuss your ongoing violations." Her words were like a slap, but I held my ground. "I'm here to talk about my rights as a homeowner," I said, voice steady. The room was silent except for the shuffling of papers and the quiet hum of a projector. Then Diane Mallory, the HOA secretary, caught my eye. She sat stiffly beside Marlene, fingers nervously tapping a pen. Her eyes flickered between the board and me, betraying a conflict beneath her composed facade. Marlene launched into a rehearsed tirade, listing infractions with surgical precision. "Your kayak blocks emergency access. Your garden decorations violate the aesthetic guidelines. Your family gatherings create noise disturbances. Community peace doesn't come at the expense of personal history," I shot back, glancing at Diane again. Her fingers stilled for a moment before resuming their nervous tapping. After the meeting, Diane lingered near the exit, avoiding my gaze, but when I stepped outside, she caught up. "Cole," she whispered, voice barely audible, "things aren't as simple as you think. Some rules, they are enforced for reasons beyond the bylaws." I frowned. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder. "Marlene's got her agenda. Not everyone on the board agrees, but they're too afraid to speak up." Before I could ask more, she disappeared into the crowd. That night, I sat on the porch with my wife Jenny, watching the oak tree's silhouette sway in the moonlight. "This isn't just about fines," I said. "They're trying to push us out." Jenny squeezed my hand. "We'll fight, together." Days later, the HOA blocked access to the community park where we held family picnics. Signs popped up overnight: unauthorized use, private property. The neighborhood murmured with discontent, but Marlene's grip tightened. It was clear they wanted total control. I reached out to Riley, my old friend and ex-Delta Force operator. When I told her what was happening, her response was simple. "Sounds like they need a lesson in boundaries." Her confidence was contagious. I wasn't alone. Meanwhile, I started documenting everything: photos of signs, recordings of meetings, copies of notices, each piece a brick in a wall I planned to tear down. One afternoon, Diane stopped by unannounced. Her eyes darted nervously. I found something," she said, pulling a folded note from her purse. It was a list of payments, expenses, and unexplained transfers linked to Marlene's personal accounts. "You didn't get this from me," she warned, "but this could change things." I took the paper, heart pounding. This was the first real crack in their fortress. Walking back inside, the oak tree caught my eye, its branches reaching defiantly toward the sky. That tree held more stories than any HOA rule book. And like that tree, I was ready to stand tall. Diane's note burned a hole in my pocket as I paced the living room. It wasn't just numbers on paper. It was proof. Proof that Marlene's grip on the HOA wasn't about community standards, but personal gain. But Diane, she was still scared. I could tell. Every time I saw her at meetings, she'd glance over her shoulder like she expected someone to catch her slipping. I called Riley, my voice low. "I got something." But Diane's in deep. She's afraid, but she wants out. "Good," Riley said. "We'll need her. People like that can turn the tide." I met Diane the next morning at the corner cafe. She looked over her shoulder like a fugitive, hands wrapped tight around her coffee cup. "I don't want to be the snitch," she said, voice shaking, "but if someone doesn't stand up, this place will eat you alive." Her words echoed my own fears. The HOA wasn't just a nuisance, it was a machine designed to grind us down. But with Diane's inside knowledge, maybe we could jam the gears. Over the next few days, the tension in the neighborhood thickened. Marlene ramped up the pressure, threatening more fines, sending compliance officers to patrol our streets. One afternoon, a stern woman in a badge showed up at our door, measuring the height of my garden fence like we were criminals. "Your fence exceeds the allowable height," she said flatly. "Please rectify immediately." Jenny watched quietly, biting her lip. This wasn't the neighborhood we'd moved into years ago. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the oak tree, I took a moment to sit on the old bench beneath it. That bench, weathered wood, scars from decades, had been my father's favorite spot. Every groove told a story. I traced the edge with my fingers, thinking about how much this fight was about preserving more than just land. It was about memory, roots. I wasn't going to let that go. Riley dropped by later that week, her presence a steadying force in the storm. "We need more than papers and whispers," she said. "You've got Diane." "Great, but Marlene's playing hardball now. We need to gather dirt. Real dirt." That night, I set up a small voice recorder in the community hall, hidden behind a potted plant. The next meeting was crucial. If Marlene slipped up, I'd catch it. The room filled with murmurs and the clatter of chairs. Marlene took the floor, her voice smooth but sharp. "Our community thrives on order," she began. "Those who defy us, well, they threaten everything." Her words carried a warning, but then, in a slip, something about adjusting financial reports and tightening control over dissenters, that sent a chill down my spine. I glanced at Diane. She sat rigid, hands clenched, lips pressed thin. I caught her eyes for a moment, fear mixed with resolve. After the meeting, Diane pulled me aside. "There's more," she whispered. "Files, emails, hidden away in the old clubhouse basement, but it's risky." Risky was an understatement. That basement was a shadowy relic, the kind of place people avoid. But if that's where the truth hid, I had to find it. The next morning, Riley and I approached the clubhouse just as the sun was rising. The air was thick with dew and silence, broken only by distant birdsong. The building looked abandoned, paint peeling, windows clouded. Inside, the basement stairs creaked under our feet. Dust motes floated in the beams of our flashlights. Every step felt heavier, like the building was swallowing us whole. Then, a flicker, a light bulb overhead sputtered before plunging us into darkness. I cursed under my breath, fumbling for my phone's flashlight. We reached the cabinet Diane mentioned, locked tight, old but sturdy. I picked the lock. Riley watched the corridor nervously. Inside, folders filled with documents, handwritten notes, spreadsheets filled with suspicious entries, pages detailing payments, contracts, even threats disguised as community enforcement. I pulled out a yellowed envelope, the edges brittle. Inside, an old handwritten map of the neighborhood, markings in red, zones of influence, properties targeted, notes about problem families. This was more than paperwork. It was a blueprint of control. We heard footsteps above, voices. We froze. "I'd," Riley hissed, dragging me behind a stack of crates. Heart pounding, I listened as the voices passed. Marlene's voice was unmistakable. "Everything's under control," she said, voice sharp. "No one suspects a thing." The danger hit home hard. This wasn't just about rules, it was a calculated takeover. Back at home, Jenny waited, worry etched across her face. I showed her what we'd found. Her eyes filled with tears. "This is war," she said softly. "But you're not alone. With Diane's note, the recordings, and this new haul of evidence, our fight had legs." But the road ahead was dark, and Marlene wouldn't go down quietly. "Where are you watching from right now? Drop your location in the comments. I want to hear how communities everywhere deal with fights like this. And if you're ready to see how this battle unfolds, stay tuned. The next part dives deeper into the fight that's about to shake this whole neighborhood." The next morning, the tension wasn't just in the air, it was in every step I took across the yard. The oak tree cast long shadows as if warning me to tread carefully. But I wasn't about to back down, not now. Marlene's latest move came wrapped in a thick envelope, an eviction notice. The claim, repeated violations and threats to community harmony. The paper felt heavy in my hands, but I refused to let it crush me. Jenny looked over the notice, her eyes flickering with a mix of fear and defiance. "They can't just push us out like this," she said. "This house, it's everything." That night, I sat down with Riley, spreading out every piece of evidence we'd gathered. The forged documents, the audio recordings, Diane's secret notes. It was more than enough to hit back. "We're not dealing with a standard HOA," Riley said, her tone cold. "This is organized intimidation." "I know," I replied. "That's why we need to get ahead of them." We mapped out a plan, legal consultation, gathering neighborhood allies, and documenting every interaction. I even started recording conversations during HOA meetings, capturing every overstep and threat. Word spread quietly. A few neighbors approached me, hesitant but hopeful. One elderly couple who'd always stayed silent confessed they'd been fined unfairly too. Another family had faced constant harassment over lawn decorations. The undercurrent was clear. Marlene's reign wasn't just mine to fight. But Marlene didn't sit idle. One afternoon, her compliance officers showed up, blocking our driveway with an official-looking barricade. "We're enforcing a temporary restriction," the lead officer said. "Your family gatherings are violating community noise ordinances." Jenny stood firm. "This is our home. Our family has every right to be here." The officers didn't budge. The standoff lasted hours, neighbors gathering to watch the spectacle, half fearful, half curious. Inside, I paced, frustration boiling. The oak tree outside my window reminded me of resilience, its branches bent in the wind but never broke. Late that evening, Diane called. Her voice trembled but held resolve. "There's more," she whispered. "Some board members want out. They're scared of Marlene's tactics, but don't know how to fight back." That gave me an idea. Maybe we could chip away at her support from within. Over the next few days, I quietly met with a handful of dissenting board members. Their fear was real, but so was their desire for change. They shared confidential meeting notes, plans to escalate fines, pressure tactics, and even threats of legal action against families who spoke out. The corruption ran deeper than I imagined. At home, Jenny and I talked late into the night about what this meant, not just for us, but for the whole neighborhood. "This fight is bigger than us," she said, "but you've got the heart for it." Her faith was a lifeline. Meanwhile, I doubled down on my research, learning HOA laws, tenant rights, and legal loopholes. The more I dug, the clearer it became. Marlene had crossed several lines that could cost her everything. One afternoon, as I walked past the oak tree, I noticed a small carving I hadn't seen before. My dad's initials intertwined with mine, a reminder that this legacy was worth defending. With renewed determination, I prepared to escalate. Marlene had turned a neighborhood into a battlefield, but I was ready to reclaim it, not with fists, but with facts and strategy. The old community clubhouse sat at the edge of the neighborhood like a forgotten relic. Its paint peeled in chunks, and the once bright windows were clouded with years of grime. Riley and I pulled up in my truck just before dusk, the fading light casting long shadows that made the place look like something out of a horror flick. "Ready for a little treasure hunt?" Riley smirked, slamming the door shut behind us. I nodded, feeling a mix of anticipation and unease. Diane's tip had been vague but promising. There were files hidden in the basement that could blow this whole thing wide open. If Marlene's corruption was as deep as the papers suggested, this was our shot to find the proof. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with dust and mildew. We switched on our flashlights and carefully made our way down the narrow, creaking stairs. Each step groaned like it was warning us to turn back. The basement was a cramped maze of old filing cabinets, cardboard boxes stacked high, and discarded furniture covered in moth-eaten tarps. The silence pressed against us, broken only by the occasional drip of water somewhere unseen. I ran my fingers over a cabinet handle, cold, rusty. It took a few tries, but finally the lock gave way with a sharp click. Inside were stacks of folders, some yellowed with age, others surprisingly recent. I pulled out a thick binder labeled Financials Confidential. Riley leafed through it as I scanned the room, my eyes catching a dusty, folded envelope tucked behind a pile of papers. I unfolded it carefully. Inside was a handwritten ledger, detailing payments from the HOA's budget to accounts I didn't recognize. Notes scribbled in the margins hinted at kickbacks and special favors. My heart pounded. This was it. Suddenly, the overhead light flickered, the old bulb sputtering before plunging us into darkness. I cursed, fumbling for my phone's flashlight. As the beam cut through the black, the sound of footsteps echoed from above. Voices followed, low, urgent. "Keep it quiet, we can't let Hartman find out what's buried here." Marlene's voice, unmistakable. Riley's hand found mine, squeezing tight. "Hide." We ducked behind a stack of boxes, barely daring to breathe. I watched as two figures moved through the basement, rifling through cabinets, shoving papers into bags. The weight of what we'd found hit me harder. Marlene was covering her tracks, destroying evidence. We had to act fast. Once the footsteps faded, we slipped out the back door into the cooling night air, hearts racing. Back home, I spread the documents across the kitchen table, Jenny watching silently from the doorway. Her eyes were heavy with worry, but I saw a spark of hope, too. "This changes everything," I said quietly. "We've got proof she's been siphoning funds, hiding her misdeeds." Jenny nodded. "We need to be careful. They're desperate." The next morning, Diane showed up unexpectedly. Her usual nervous energy was tempered by a newfound resolve. "I've been thinking," she said, pulling out a flash drive. I copied more files from the HOA server, emails, contracts, things no one's supposed to see. She hesitated, glancing around like someone might be listening. "If Marlene finds out I helped, I'm done." I put a hand on her shoulder. "We'll protect you. But this is the kind of truth that breaks chains." With Diane's data, the puzzle pieces started fitting together. Illegal fines, manipulated records, intimidation tactics. It was a systematic campaign to silence homeowners and consolidate power. But the more we uncovered, the more dangerous it felt. Marlene's reach was long, and her grip on the neighborhood tight. I sat again on that battered bench beneath the oak tree later that evening. The rough wood was cool against my skin, the deep grooves worn smooth by years of hands like mine. Here was a place untouched by the HOA's schemes, a silent witness to the battle unfolding. Jenny joined me, handing over a cup of coffee. "You carrying the weight of this whole fight?" she said softly. I shrugged. "Maybe. But it's not just about me, it's about everyone who's been pushed down." Her smile was steady. "Then we keep pushing back." Tomorrow we'd take the next step. Legal counsel was waiting. This wasn't just a fight over yard decorations anymore, it was about justice. And I was ready. Diane's arrival that afternoon was unexpected, but not unwelcome. She looked around nervously, as if the walls might be listening. I brought something," she said, holding out a small flash drive like it was a lifeline. Her voice wavered, but there was determination in her eyes I hadn't seen before. I took the drive, weighing the gravity of the moment. "You sure about this?" I asked, lowering my voice. She swallowed hard. "If Marlene finds out I helped, it's over for me. But I can't keep watching." Jenny gave her a warm smile from the kitchen doorway. "You're not alone." That night, Riley and I dove into the files Diane had risked everything to get. Emails filled with thinly veiled threats. Contracts signed without homeowner consent. Documents outlining plans to manipulate fines and silence dissent. Every line felt like a punch to the gut, proof of a system built to suffocate. Meanwhile, Marlene's retaliation didn't wait. A certified eviction notice arrived, demanding we vacate the property within 30 days. The claim was material breach of community rules. The irony stung. The real breach was hers. Family dinners grew tense. My kids whispered about the mean ladies who wanted to take our home. Jenny kept a brave face, but I caught the worry flicker in her eyes when she thought I wasn't looking. One evening, as I sat beneath the oak tree, its ancient branches swaying gently in the breeze, I traced the familiar carvings my father had left years ago. The bench felt solid beneath me, like an anchor in the storm. That night I recorded a message, not for the HOA or even Marlene, but for my family. This fight's bigger than rules. It's about standing up when it feels like the whole world's against you, about protecting what's ours, not just land, but memories, dignity. The next day, Diane met me in secret. "I've been talking to some of the board members," she said cautiously. "They're scared, but trapped by Marlene's grip. Some want out, but they need a way." A plan began to form. Fracture the board from within. Together, we reached out to a few hesitant allies. They wanted change, but feared backlash, so we agreed, anonymity until the right moment. Riley suggested recording upcoming meetings, capturing incriminating conversations to force transparency. Community support started to shift. Neighbors who once kept their heads down began sharing stories of unfair fines and intimidation. At a small gathering, an elderly couple approached me clutching a faded photo of their garden, confiscated by the HOA for violating design codes. Their voice cracked as they recounted years of quiet suffering. It wasn't just my family. It was a neighborhood under siege. Late one evening, a message popped up on my phone. An anonymous tip. "Check the old treehouse in Miller Park." Curious, I took Jenny and the kids to the park. The treehouse, once a childhood refuge, was now overgrown, hidden behind tangled branches. Inside, dust-coated, forgotten toys and a weathered notebook. Flipping through, I found sketches and notes, plans made by Marlene and her loyalists, detailing secret meetings and tactics to suppress dissent. The notebook smelled of damp wood and years of silence, but it spoke volumes. Back home, we gathered around the kitchen table, piecing together the puzzle. Each discovery tightened the noose around Marlene's schemes. Yet with every step forward, the stakes grew higher. The eviction deadline loomed, and the HOA's threats became more brazen. But beneath the weight of it all, the oak tree remained steadfast, a symbol of resilience and the fight to protect what truly matters. Where are you watching from right now? Let me know in the comments, because no matter where we come from, standing up to unfair power hits close to home. Stick around. Next, things get even more intense as the fight moves into the legal arena. We were past the point of quiet resistance. The eviction notice hung over us like a storm cloud, but it was time to stop reacting and start acting. Riley sat across from me in the cluttered living room, her eyes sharp, voice low. It's time to bring this fight into the open. I've been talking to a property lawyer, someone who knows HOA laws inside and out. I nodded, the weight on my chest shifting from uncertainty to purpose. Good, because Marlene isn't just pushing papers, she's playing for keeps. We arranged a meeting the next day, Diane in tow. She looked thinner, her anxiety etched in every glance, but the files she brought could tip the scales. Emails showing Marlene directing board members to falsify reports, audio clips of threats disguised as community guidance. At the lawyer's office, we laid everything out, document after document, recording after recording. Your case is solid, she said, eyes scanning the files. You've got evidence of harassment, financial misconduct, and illegal enforcement actions. Relief and adrenaline rushed through me. What's next? We file a formal complaint, demand a temporary restraining order to halt the eviction, and prepare for a civil suit if it comes to that. Back home, the neighborhood's atmosphere shifted. Word spread, hope flickering in hushed conversations, glances exchanged with a new kind of courage. I set up hidden recorders during HOA meetings, capturing every misstep. Marlene's tone grew sharper, more desperate. She was on the defensive, and I could feel it. Diane continued to walk the tightrope, feeding me insider info but wary of being caught. One afternoon she confided, "If they find out I'm helping you, I'm done. But I can't stand this anymore." That vulnerability fueled my determination. This wasn't just about me or my family, it was about every neighbor silenced by fear. The old oak tree outside stood tall through it all, its branches a silent testament to resilience. I found myself returning there each evening, drawing strength from its unyielding presence. One evening, Riley and I laid out a plan to confront Marlene publicly at the upcoming HOA board meeting. With the neighborhood's growing support, it was time to turn the tide. The meeting day arrived, thick with tension. Neighbors filled the room, some hesitant, others emboldened by the mounting evidence. Marlene entered, her usual confident posture faltering slightly under the weight of scrutiny. I stepped forward, voice steady but charged. "We've uncovered a pattern of abuse, fines manipulated, documents falsified, and threats disguised as rules." Heads turned, murmurs spread. Diane, sitting quietly nearby, caught my eye. Her hands trembled, but she nodded, ready to stand. I played the recordings. The room fell silent, the dam breaking. Marlene's facade cracked, her defense weak and faltering. Neighbors began sharing their own stories, their voices joining into a chorus demanding change. That night, as I sat once more beneath the oak tree, I felt a shift, not just in the neighborhood, but inside myself. This fight wasn't just about a house or fines, it was about standing up, speaking out, and refusing to be controlled. And for the first time, I knew we were winning. The day of the community barbecue felt oddly charged, as if the entire neighborhood was holding its breath. Marlene had agreed to attend, though her smirk never quite reached her eyes. She acted like she was still in control, but the undercurrent of tension was impossible to ignore. I'd arranged for discreet recording devices to be placed around the picnic area, not just to catch idle chatter, but to capture the real conversations, the slips, the admissions, the cracks in the HOA's iron grip. Families arrived with dishes in hand, kids chasing each other between tables, laughter mixing with the low hum of neighbors catching up. The oak tree, bathed in afternoon light, stood tall nearby, its leaves whispering secrets of endurance and time. Marlene circled the gathering, her gaze sharp, searching for weaknesses. When she stopped to talk with a few board members, I subtly activated a recorder. What followed was a damning display of arrogance. "We've squeezed them tight," she said, voice low but fierce. "If they think they can fight back, they're dead wrong." Her words were like a match to dry kindling. A neighbor whispered, "Did you hear that? She called us dead." The tension shifted, eyes turning toward her, the mask slipping. I caught Diane watching from a distance, her usual nervous tremble steadied by resolve. As the afternoon wore on, more neighbors shared stories of harassment. Fines for children's toys left outside, threats over holiday decorations, visits from compliance officers late at night. Their voices wove together into a tapestry of frustration and hurt. Then Marlene, sensing the momentum slipping, tried to regain control. She raised her voice. "We're maintaining standards. Order! You all signed those rules." A chorus of responses rose. "You signed under duress," a voice shouted, "when you can't see the whole picture." The gathering turned from celebration to confrontation. I stepped forward, heart pounding but steady. This neighborhood isn't about control, it's about community, and that means respect, not threats. The room erupted in applause. Later, when Marlene tried to spin the story on local news, the recording surfaced online. Her threats and admissions were exposed for all to hear. Her influence waned as board members began resigning, some apologizing publicly for their complicity. The neighborhood breathed easier. Back at home, sitting beneath the oak tree with Jenny and the kids, I felt the weight lift. The battles weren't over, but the tides had shifted. That tree, with its rough bark and deep roots, had become more than a symbol. It was a promise. A reminder that no matter how fierce the storm, standing firm could weather anything. Marlene's public unraveling was just the beginning. With her influence slipping, the HOA's board became a house divided, fractured, vulnerable. Whispers of dissent grew louder as more neighbors stepped forward, sharing stories and demanding change. I found myself in quiet meetings with those board members willing to listen. People tired of Marlene's iron fist, but afraid to speak out. They offered documents, internal emails, even admission that some fines were arbitrary, some votes rigged. One evening, Diane and I sat around my kitchen table, sorting through piles of paperwork. "They're scared, but they want out," she said, voice soft but resolute. "You've given them hope." Her words hit me hard. The fight wasn't just mine, it was ours. Every corner of the neighborhood was feeling the strain, and every voice mattered. Meanwhile, the legal wheels began turning. Our lawyer filed formal complaints against the HOA, citing harassment, financial misconduct, and violations of property rights. The eviction notice put on hold pending investigation. But the tension wasn't easing. Marlene's loyalists pushed back, trying to stall, spread rumors, intimidate those who dared to stand with us. I caught wind of late-night calls, veiled threats whispered behind closed doors. Jenny noticed the change in me, the weight of constant vigilance. "You're carrying too much," she warned gently one night. "We have to take care of ourselves too." Her words grounded me. I realized this wasn't just a legal battle. It was a marathon. Neighbors rallied in unexpected ways. Mrs. Patel, who always kept to herself, organized community watch groups. The Hendersons, who'd been silent for years, started attending meetings, asking tough questions. The oak tree outside my window became a symbol of our growing unity. People gathered beneath its sprawling branches, exchanging ideas, sharing concerns, drawing strength. One afternoon, Diane handed me an envelope. Inside were letters from residents, signatures calling for Marlene's removal, and a transparent, accountable HOA. With mounting evidence and growing community support, the board scheduled an emergency meeting. The air was thick with anticipation. Inside the room, faces I'd never seen before listened intently. Some spoke with trembling voices, others with fiery conviction. Marlene sat at the head, visibly rattled. Attempts to justify her actions fell flat as one after another, former allies recounted her abuses. I spoke last, voice steady despite the pounding in my chest. This neighborhood deserves better. We deserve respect, fairness, and truth. Applause broke out, genuine and heartfelt. Walking home later, the bench under the oak tree beckoned. Sitting there, I thought of my dad, his hands carving initials into this wood decades ago. That bench wasn't just a place to rest, it was a testament to perseverance. This fight had tested us all, but it was far from over. The legal battles would come, the healing would take time, but we'd taken the first steps toward reclaiming our community. And no matter what, I knew one thing: we were no longer alone. Where are you watching from? Drop your location below. I want to hear how your community stands up when the odds are stacked against them. Stay with me, because the next part takes us deeper into the showdown that could change everything. The courtroom smelled like stale coffee and tension. My heart hammered as I stepped inside, but I forced myself to stand tall. This wasn't just a trial, it was the neighborhood's reckoning. Jenny squeezed my hand briefly before the proceedings began. Her eyes said everything: hope, fear, strength. The room filled with familiar faces, neighbors who'd come to witness the fight for fairness. Marlene sat at the defense table, her usual smugness replaced by a tight jaw and darting eyes. Our lawyer took the lead, methodically laying out the case. Evidence after evidence, forged documents, falsified fines, intimidation tactics, all painting a clear picture of abuse. When it was my turn, I spoke from the heart. This house is more than a building. It's where my father's stories live, where my family grew, where our community was meant to thrive. I glanced at the oak tree sketch I'd carried with me, a silent reminder of resilience. The HOA was supposed to protect us, not threaten our homes. We deserve transparency, respect, and justice. Across the room, Marlene's supporters shifted uncomfortably. During cross-examination, Diane took the stand. Her voice wavered but held firm as she detailed the corruption she'd witnessed. It was like watching a machine grind down the very people it was meant to serve, she said quietly. Her testimony struck a chord. The judge's expression hardened. Marlene tried to defend her actions, spinning tales of community standards and order, but the weight of evidence crushed her claims. Outside the courtroom, words spread fast. Neighbors greeted me with nods and smiles, quiet victories in a long battle. Later, under the oak tree's watchful branches, I felt a calm I hadn't known in months. Jenny wrapped her arm around me. "You did good," she whispered. This fight was far from over, but today we'd taken a giant step forward. The HOA board meeting was packed beyond capacity. The usual polished town hall had transformed into an arena where every word mattered, every glance carried weight. Neighbors filled the seats, their faces a mix of hope, frustration, and quiet anticipation. Marlene sat at the head of the table, the air around her thick with tension. She wore her usual confident mask, but I caught the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes as the room settled. Diane took a deep breath before stepping up. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was clear. "I can no longer stay silent. I've seen the damage Marlene's leadership has caused, not just to me, but to every family here." She laid out documents, emails, and meeting transcripts that confirmed years of manipulation and abuse. The crowd listened, rapt. Marlene tried to interrupt, to spin her story, but the room was no longer hers. Her words fell flat, drowned by murmurs and whispered agreements. I stood next. The oak tree's carved initials flashed in my mind, the symbol of everything worth fighting for. "This neighborhood isn't just property lines and rules," I said, voice steady. "It's about people, families, memories. We were promised a community, not a dictatorship." Eyes met mine, nods spreading like wildfire. Stories poured forth, neighbors sharing their own battles, their own moments of feeling powerless. Marlene's allies tried to retake control, but the tide had turned. By the meeting's end, a vote was called. The board, once silent in Marlene's shadow, chose change, her resignation, and the formation of a new, transparent HOA council. Outside, the neighborhood buzzed with relief and quiet celebration. It wasn't just a victory, it was a reclaiming of dignity. That night, beneath the oak tree, Jenny and I sat with our kids. The bench, worn, scarred, and steadfast, felt like home. I looked around at the faces illuminated by porch lights and realized this fight wasn't just mine. It belonged to all of us. And together, we'd made it through. The neighborhood felt different the morning after the board meeting. Quiet, but charged with a new kind of energy, one born from victory, but also from hard lessons learned. Jenny and I stepped outside, the air fresh with possibility. The oak tree's leaves rustled softly, like a gentle nod from an old friend. The bench beneath it, scarred by years and touched by countless hands, held a calm presence. I ran my fingers along the worn wood, tracing the carvings my dad had left decades ago. It wasn't just a bench. It was a symbol of endurance, of legacy, and now, of triumph. Our family picnic that afternoon was different too. No more tense glances or interrupted moments. Kids laughed freely, chasing each other across the lawn, while neighbors gathered with smiles, sharing food and stories. The community we'd fought for was healing, slowly but surely. I caught sight of Diane across the yard. She looked lighter somehow, as if a heavy weight had lifted from her shoulders. She nodded to me, a silent thanks for the journey we'd shared. Marlene was gone, her shadow finally lifted from our streets. The new HOA board, elected by the community, promised transparency and fairness. It wasn't perfect yet, but it was a start. Later, as the sun dipped behind the houses, I sat alone beneath the oak tree. The bench creaked softly as I settled in, the wood familiar and comforting. I thought about my father, how he'd taught me that roots run deep, that standing firm in the face of storms is what defines us. This fight wasn't just about yard signs or fines. It was about dignity, about protecting what matters most, about standing up when no one else would. And that legacy? It's not just mine to carry. It belongs to every family here, to every neighbor who refused to be silenced. As the evening sky deepened, I smiled quietly to myself. The oak stood tall still, and so would we. If you've ever faced an HOA battle or stood up against unfair power, share your story below. Where are you watching from? Your experience matters, and this community sees you. Because sometimes standing your ground isn't just about winning. It's about holding on to what makes a house a home.